Come on, let's get out of here. Look, Emerald City is closer and prettier than ever. Out of the woods, you're out of the dark, you're out of the night. Step into the sun, step into the light. Keep straight ahead for the most glorious place on the face of the earth or the sky. Hold on to your breath, hold on to your heart, hold on to your hope. March up to the gate and bid it open.
Step out of the dark, step into the... Yes. You're going to be singing that to yourself for the rest of the week, aren't you? At least I hope so. For several weeks now, I'm thinking about this theme of light for our season of Epiphany, living in the light. And as I read the scriptures, that little ditty just sort of haunted me this week. Step out of the dark, step into the light. So I've been thinking about it for a couple of weeks, and it's just haunted me, and I just wanted to share. So I hope it haunts you too. But it took a little while to find it. It's not actually part of the soundtrack proper. So if you look up the soundtrack for The Wizard of Oz, the 1939 Wizard of Oz, you won't find it. And it doesn't even really have a proper song name. It's just called Optimistic Voices, as if to cue the sound guy what it is. Optimistic Voices. And really special thanks to Kurt. It's really a problem to get some of this stuff off of YouTube. So I'm grateful to him. So that just stuck with me. It fit. It spoke to me of the darkness that we find ourselves in, the light. And for me, that's a great metaphor for a spiritual journey. In fact, I love the little illustration, the yellow brick road. You know, I don't know what Frank Baum had in mind, but I'm okay with the yellow brick road as a metaphor for the spiritual journey. And sometimes we just need to sing ourselves a little song in the dark while we're waiting to find ourselves into the light. The light is there, but the darkness is there too. We experience both. Sometimes darkness descends physically, mentally, emotionally, politically, in the community, in our world. Sometimes we make choices that land us in a season of darkness, and we can't figure out how to save ourselves. Sometimes a season of darkness is a season of rest and healing, and the starlight is enough. But you hear this image in Scripture everywhere, and I'm going to share a couple of those scriptures with you today. When my grandson was about 2.5, I tried to push his stroller onto an elevator, and he just pitched a fit. And I don't remember whether I was in a hotel or a department store or where it was, but I was pretty sure nobody else wanted to hear that sound for any length of time. He just screamed in terror. He was just in his little umbrella stroller. And I tried picking him up in my arms and, doing the stroller with one hand. I've gotten pretty good at that. No dice. Something about that elevator scared him to the point of hysteria. He was not an especially fearful kid. And because I'm a genius, I knew what to do. I knew how to fix this. I took him over to the train station. Our train station over here, there's an elevator, just goes up one floor so you can get on the bridge and go across to the other platform if that's the train you're taking, because that's really, you can take the stairs, but if you're pulling a suitcase, it's nice to have the elevator. Well, the elevator over there, at least one of them, is glass. Right? It's windows all around. So I took him in, and I'm showing him the workings of it, and as soon as that elevator door closed, he exploded. Obviously, the fact that it was a windowless box that scared him, this still wasn't the answer. Same hysteria. So it was a year later, it was about 3.5, and I thought we would try again. Because he was still pitching a fit. Anywhere we went, it's like, I'm not getting on an elevator, not getting on an elevator. And he was a little more capable of conversation at 3.5, so I said maybe he would be ready to try again, because he's a bigger boy. And now he's pretty interested in how things work. It didn't hurt that I promised him a top-down view of the trains going by from the bridge that went over. So now we have a little, bait. And so far, that has worked. He loved it. That approach has not worked for fish yet, but it worked for elevators. And Psalm 27 just struck me this way today. Well, earlier this week and last couple of weeks as I was preparing this sermon. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Of course, that's why we're here. Whom shall I fear besides elevators? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? Well, there's some people to be afraid of. When evildoers assail me to devour my flesh, and isn't that just how it feels? My adversaries and foes, they shall stumble and fall. Well, that's a little optimistic. Though an army encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war rise up against me, I will be confident. One thing I asked of the Lord, that I will seek after, to live in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord and to inquire of the Lord in his temple. He will hide me in his shelter. In the day of trouble, he will conceal me under the cover of his tent, and he will set me high on a rock. Hear, O Lord, when I cry aloud. Be gracious to me and answer me. Come, my heart says, seek God's face. Your face, Lord, I do seek. Don't hide your face from me. I believe that I shall see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord. Be strong. Let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord. It's a great hymn. Most biblical scholars, if you read a commentary on this or just a devotional, will talk about the confidence that this psalmist has. But I have to say, I don't quite hear confidence as much as I hear someone trying to talk themselves into having some confidence. Right? Isn't that how we help ourselves when we're in a difficult time? And we know in our heads that God has always been with us. God has never let us down. God is always present, but we're just not feeling it. And this is a great psalm to read and repeat that to ourselves. And so in this psalm, I get an impression of someone just trying some positive self-talk to remind themselves of God's faithfulness. Step out of the dark and into the light. You can do it. You can step out of the dark and into the light, trusting in God. What's the trouble? Personal conflict, enemies all around. We've all felt that. Maybe you've experienced it in your neighborhood, in your work. I don't know, high school seems like it's just one endless round of social disasters. It can be a dark place when you're living through a time of personal conflict with family members or a spouse or coworkers. It can be a dark place when you're in a season of estrangement from people you love or used to love or thought you loved. And now you don't know what to think. Maybe they betrayed you. Maybe they hurt you. Maybe they just ghosted you. It's a dark place to just not know what to do about a broken relationship. My father-in-law was a pastor, and he had a relationship with another pastor in one of his churches early on in his ministry. And that pastor served a very small church on a very poor in a very poor neighborhood in town. And so the church really did not pay their pastor adequately. He supplemented his income doing some other things, but he really struggled financially. And one day, he asked my father-in-law if he could borrow his car because he needed to go make a visit to a relative. And he didn't have a car. But he didn't come back. And then he didn't come back. And then he didn't come back. And my father-in-law finally tracked him down, only to find that he had sold the car for $200 to feed his family. Now, isn't that complicated? Isn't that complicated? Of course it's stealing, right? Of course it's unethical what he did. But what would you do if your children were starving? More to the point, what wouldn't you do if your children were starving and you could not figure out anything else? When he told me this story, it was years and years after it happened, and my father-in-law was still hurt and still confused, but he kind of understood. What must it have been like to feel that that was your only available answer? Psalm 27 reminds us that we can step out of the darkness. Whether you're in the middle of a relationship difficulty, if you're in the middle of a difficult season, you can take the step out into the light and God will meet you there. Or maybe you're hanging on to something that hurt you a long time ago and it's still hurting you and it is just never resolved. It's just never resolved. This is also your song today. Step out of the dark and into the light. Personal conflict, estrangement, enemies without, enemies within, in your neighborhood, in the news, wherever it is, wherever you are feeling beset and confused and at a loss and frustrated and powerless and angry, whether it's personal or public, you can step out of the darkness and into the light because the light's there, even if you can't quite see it. I have another story from our Bible as I was thinking about light and stuff like that. It's right at the beginning of the Gospel of Mark, and there's a lovely pairing of two healing episodes. First, Jesus and his disciples are in the synagogue, and Jesus heals a man with an impure spirit. It's followed right after by the healing of Peter's wife's mom. The man in the synagogue is a problem to himself and to the whole community. He appears to have what we would now say is some kind of mental illness. A demon possesses him. And whether it's schizophrenia or narcissistic grandiosity, although I have to say Herod kind of has that sewn up in our Bible. Herod is a champion narcissist, whatever. Suicidal depression, we don't know what was wrong with the man. He had a problem and he was a problem, and Jesus healed him. And then something just every bit as distressing but a little more commonplace happens in verse 29. As soon as they left the synagogues, right away, everything happens in Mark right away. I think there's something like 52 times in his very short gospel, Mark says, immediately. They entered the house of Simon and Andrew, that's Peter, Simon Peter, with James and John. So they're bringing the whole crowd home, probably to have dinner. But Simon's mother-in-law, Peter's mother-in-law, was in bed with a fever. Now, the rabbis called this a burning in the bones, right? And Jesus came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. And the fever left her, and she began to serve him. Now, at first glance, it's like, seriously? Jesus raised her so he could get dinner? But that's not what's happening here. That's not what's happening. She is not just restored to good health, she is restored back to her place in the family, back to her place in the community. Peter's mother-in-law has a fever, but it's serious enough that it removes her from community. It removes her from meaningful work. If you've ever had a season in your life when you were out of work, and you were just really at a loss, it's hard to feel good about yourself if you're feeling useless. We need something to give us meaning. And she is needed, as with any household, particularly among the peasant class, which is like 98% of the people. Everybody does their part, starting when they're 3 years old. And they need her. Not to mention that a sick family member who just might die is worrisome because we love them. And Jesus, like Job before him, rejects the concept that sickness is God's punishment for sin. That doesn't appear here at all. Later on in some of the Gospels, Jesus comes outright and says that. But right here, it's clear that he's not having any judgment with her. His understanding seems to be similar to ours. He wants her restored to wholeness. Wholeness in her body, wholeness in her emotions and relationships in her community, wholeness in her mind where she wants to be useful and active. Medicine, psychotherapy, religion, they're all about restoring people to wholeness. The word shalom is used mostly as peace, but its real meaning is to be restored to wholeness where there has been brokenness. It's about giving people a chance to step out of the dark and into the light, and in this case, the darkness of illness, of incapacity, of irrelevance, even. And I don't want you to miss a really important factor in this story: the power of community in the healing process. Jesus comes, he doesn't come in order to heal anybody. He's just going home to Peter's house. Later in some other, maybe it's Mark's gospel, maybe it's some other gospel, we learn that Jesus rents a room from Peter's mother-in-law. So it's not just Simon Peter and his wife and his mother-in-law's house. It's also where Jesus has, insofar as he has a home in Capernaum, that's where he goes. And he gets there and they tell him, well, we have a problem. Mom's sick. And he just walks right in and heals her. We don't even learn her name. We don't even learn her daughter's name, which is actually not that uncommon in the Bible. You know, the Peter's wife, no name. Peter's mother-in-law, no name. But you don't need their name to know their story, do you? You don't need their name to know their story. She is healed by this community connection. Peter, well, she knows her daughter knows Peter knows Jesus, and here we are. She didn't have to know Jesus. She didn't have to come to know Jesus. She didn't have to proclaim Jesus as Messiah. She is healed by the power of a community that loves Jesus and is being taught to love by Jesus. And then, of course, the impact of her healing is going to ripple out. In fact, it ripples out so much that the crowds start showing up the next day. And what this story tells us is it is possible on the spiritual path, with the help of God, to step out of the darkness of our illness. Are you sure we're in the right place? My 9-year-old didn't trust me to know what I was doing. I am. I'm sure. Just wait a few minutes. And you should have seen his face when the tornado was over, the house landed, and the door opened to that wild Technicolor vision of Oz. And that was among the very first movies to use Technicolor. Can you imagine in 1939 people sitting in the movie theater and suddenly this thing happens? Step out of the dark. Step into the light. Now, do you remember where that little vignette was happening? Dorothy and her friends have landed in a field of poppies because they're so eager to run for the Emerald City, which is now in view. They pay no heed to the warnings about the field. They just dash right in, which has been poisoned with a sleeping draught by the Wicked Witch. And don't we all have seasons like that? We rush headlong into some place we probably should have been a little more careful. We might even have done well to listen to somebody else's warning. And the next thing you know, we are slammed down on the ground. You think things are okay, they're headed in the right way, and a sickness befalls you, or the world takes you by surprise, you lose your job, and you don't know where you're going to get another one. War, famine, oppression, cancer, car crashes, depression. Or maybe you run headlong into something that looks good from a distance, and then when you get close, it's like, then you can't back out anymore. Happiness is so close. And then suddenly, so far. Darkness comes right up close. Not too far from here. And then the sole character in this movie who is unaffected by that sleeping draft is the Tin Man, right? It doesn't affect him. And he screams at the universe. So if you want to push the metaphor, and the yellow brick road is the spiritual path. He's yelling at God, and there is good biblical precedent for that. The one character who presumably has no heart is so heartbroken that his friends are gone. They've abandoned him through their own foolishness, and he is screaming out to the universe, "Hear, O Lord, when I cry aloud. Be gracious and answer me." And to that cry comes an answer. The Tin Man calls out to something he doesn't even know quite what. And relief comes. God has never come to me dressed like a Disney princess in a bubble. But often it is someone God sends to help hold out a hand and invite me to step out of the darkness. Salvation comes. And for us, like Dorothy and her friends, it's a kind of awakening. It's a kind of awakening. Not too far from here, somebody is down to their last dime. Somebody's got nowhere else to go. Give us your strength, Lord, and your compassion when someone finds the road of life is too steep. We know you're waiting. Not too far from here. Step out of the dark into the light.